Welcome in to the late night Gamecock show. I am your host, Matt Anderson, and joined me, as always, is Alex Jones of thebigspur.com. So, Alex, I got a big show tonight. It's going to be largely baseball because we're going to have John Whittle of thebigspur.com join us, and we're going to do our full blown South Carolina baseball preview. But just off the top here, a couple things that happened over the weekend. We'll start with the good. The softball team swept their tournament they had in Columbia this past weekend. So big time for Ashley Woodard and the new softball coach and her players and her staff. So we're excited for softball. Make sure you get out there. Go to a couple of games this year. It's a lot of fun. It's a fast-paced game. It's you're not going to be in the ballpark for 3 hours, 4 hours like you are for baseball or football sometimes. So I'm happy for the Gamecock softball team. The men's basketball team is now 0-10 in SEC play. It's tough. You look at that particular game and, South Carolina was down by 10 at halftime, 12 at halftime, something like that.
Yeah.
And the second half, Kentucky just kind of really piled it on the last 10 minutes of the game. As far as bright spots go, the big thing I can say is the Gamecocks only had 9 turnovers in the game. It gave up 80 points, but they only had 9 turnovers. Again, 4 for 22 from the 3-point line. It's going to be hard to win very many games in the SEC on the road, and especially this season when that kind of thing happens. Cam Scott did get 18 minutes. It was good to see him get out there on the court. He had 4 points, 1 of 2 from the field. Kyler Murray Boyles, 14 points, 8 rebounds, 1 assist, only 1 turnover. So that was good to see. No Gamecock had more than 2 turnovers in totality. So, maybe that's a sign of, some improvement, at least on that side of the ball, when you're turning the ball over. But on offense, they got to make – I don't know if they can just become a better 3-point shooting team, a better shooting team. But what you can fix is your turnovers. So happy about that.
Yeah, when you look at the first half of that game, South Carolina and both teams kind of got off to a slow start offensively, but South Carolina was doing what it needed to do to stay in the game, and then they kind of just had they had 2 scoring droughts in the first half that really killed them. I think it was a 4-minute, 36-second scoring drought, kind of middle first half, and then I think they scored 1 point in like the final 4 minutes or so of the first half, and in those scoring droughts, Kentucky was going on a 10-0, 11-0 run, and it really created separation. And in that second half, South Carolina got down to 9, and then 2 turnovers happened, and the next thing you know, you gave Kentucky a lot of momentum because once they get going running and get the threes falling, they can be hard to stop, and that's kind of what happened, and Kentucky ended up running away with it.
Yeah, absolutely. And, looking at the rest of the season for the Gamecocks, they have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 more games before the SEC tournament. Tomorrow night at home, Colonial Life Arena, they'll welcome Ole Miss. Ole Miss had a big comeback win over LSU over the weekend. And, Ole Miss is a pretty good team. Ken Pom has them 19th. Then after that, on Saturday, you go on the road. You play number 5 Florida. And then, after that, you can say it lightens up a little bit. You get LSU next week on Tuesday. So Alex and I will be back to talk about those 3 games next Wednesday night. So we'll talk through all that. On the women's side, the women went to Austin, Texas, and got handed their second defeat of the season. It just seemed like a game where they maybe, I don't want to say as locked in as they have been in the past couple of weeks. And Texas is a really good team, but it just seemed like it had all the makings of an upset. And despite Texas being a top 5 team in the country, anytime you beat the women's team at South Carolina, it is an upset. So we know that Dawn and the girls will rebound. They'll come back strong. They're still very much a Final Four contender, very much, probably either the favorite or a second favorite for the national championship. If you were to look at like futures odds right now. So let's not panic on women's basketball. Alex, the Super Bowl happened Sunday night. I didn't see that result coming. I thought it was going to be a little bit closer, but I was happy to see the Eagles win just because I'm a little over the Chiefs at this point. I love celebrating greatness, and it's fun to watch them. But at the same time, it was nice to see another team win it for the first time in a while. Alex, I do see that we have John here. So in respect for his time, how about you go ahead and roll the introduction, and then we'll get into baseball with John Whittle at thebigspur.com.
Welcome to the Late Night Gamecock Show from Chief Sports, South Carolina. Here are your hosts, Matt Anderson and Alex Jones of thebigspur.com.
Well, again, everyone, thank you for joining us on the Late Night Show tonight. It is on February 11th, which means we're only 3 sleeps away from South Carolina baseball starting back up in the regular season. And we get John on a handful of times throughout the year, but we always try and get John on to talk baseball at the beginning of the season, and then maybe a season recap when everything's said and done. But first off, John, how you doing tonight?
Wonderful, and certainly happy to be here. Appreciate you guys having me.
Oh, of course. And Alex is going to be on his best behavior because his boss is here.
Yeah.
No, Alex is doing a tremendous job.
Yeah, I agree. Alex is the best. I mean, I tell him I don't know when he sleeps because he's writing articles. It looks like he pumps out 10 a day sometimes on the Big Spur. So good job, Alex. We appreciate what you do on the Big Spur and what you do for this show.
Well, we expect 12, so maybe he's not doing as good a job as I thought.
I'm falling short.
Well, John, whenever we have this conversation, it always starts with expectations, and I always like to look back to look forward, right? So if you look over the past couple of years, the Gamecocks have missed the NCAA tournament. They've hosted a regional that they didn't get out of. They fell in the supers to a Florida team that I think went on to win the national championship, and then lost in a regional last year. So it's been a long time since the Gamecocks have been in Omaha, and you've been around this program and these fans long enough to know that if they don't make it to Omaha, season was crap. It was terrible. But I always like for you to come on and just talk about expectations for someone that's been around college baseball for years.
Yeah, I mean, in South Carolina, I mean, the expectation isn't going to change. I mean, the expectation is to make it to Omaha, and it obviously has been a while since that happened, but that's something that's in the system, right? Like, when Kentucky basketball has a few down years in a row and doesn't make the Final Four, like that's a big deal. Like, you're expected to make it there when you're with that program. When Alabama's not in the playoff, like you have to be there. Like you missed expectations, and that's the way it is for South Carolina baseball. It just happens to be a extended run, and this year is no different in terms of having that expectation there for being able to make it to the College World Series. Now, whether this team's in position to be able to do that is another question, but the expectation is always going to be there. And when you fall short, you have to figure out why that is and what it's going to take for you to get there the next season and make those adjustments. And, obviously those adjustments weren't made to the right standard under the past couple of coaches. And, that's why South Carolina hasn't gotten to the College World Series since 2012. So, Paul Maneri's here, and it's going to be a challenge to get to the College World Series this year, but that's certainly the expectation.
Yeah, and you talk about the challenge, and it seems like in the SEC, the challenge just keeps getting greater and greater for every sport. It's not just football anymore, and it's not just Kentucky basketball and some other teams popping in and out of the NCAA tournament every year. And baseball is no different. I mean, I've said for years, I think that the SEC typically has 6 to 10 teams that are College World Series good. It just they play each other in the super regionals more often than not, and only one can make it. But talking about the past, and the coaching change just happened. So what have you figured out about Coach Paul Maneri and the time you've been around him, the scrimmages, being around BP? What can you tell us about how the mindset might be different than it has been in the past couple of years?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a lot different in the program, and I think the word I go to most is just the structure that's over there now. And it's different styles and different philosophies. Like, Paul Maneri is more of an old school guy. He He's attention to detail. He's very structured in what he and his coaching staff do. There's a high accountability. That's just kind of the way he operates. Just to contrast with Mark Kingston, and this isn't necessarily the wrong way, but it was more of a pro style approach to a program. Like when you're in professional baseball, you don't necessarily have coaches breathing down your neck 24/7. It's more of a you get your job done, you get your work in, like you hold yourself to that standard. And there wasn't that same level of accountability, that same level of structure. And I think I think college players need that in terms of how to be successful. And that's something that Paul Maneri has certainly brought in. That's maybe a little bit different from what it has been in years past.
And kind of sticking to that, what kind of impact have you seen Terry Rooney make so far? Obviously, we haven't gotten to games yet, but through practices, Terry Rooney is a guy who's connected with Paul Maneri. Just what kind of impact have you seen him make so far?
Yes, it's a good question, and it is hard to measure right now. I mean, you see
Yeah.
some guys who have really improved, and some guys who have maybe taken a step back, and he has kind of the same mindset and same philosophy and the stuff that he does, versus maybe some coaches in the past. And that's not to speak ill of anybody, because Matt Williams has been really successful, Skylar Meade's been really successful. It's just different under each guy, and some players thrive in different ways. Like Eli Jerzenbeck, I mean, it's been really, really tough for him. Like Matthew Becker is thriving, and that's not necessarily something that you would have necessarily thought, coming into this season. Some folks had kind of a preconceived notion of what Matthew Becker is, and he's given up 3 earned runs in about 22 innings worth of scrimmages. When you go back into the fall, he gave up 1 this preseason in 11 innings, and that was a solo home run to Ethan Petrie, who's been known to hit a couple off some pretty good pitchers. So,
Yeah.
he doesn't necessarily, this pitching staff, I don't think necessarily has like a whole lot of top end talent, like first round, second round, the third round type of draft talent, but there's depth to it. So, you're going to have the opportunity to see him in that kind of role. Like he's going to have to manage and handle the pitching staff really well. And, I think we'll learn a lot about him as it goes along.
Yeah, I think it's interesting when you also think about Monty Lee being back, and Monty Lee has kind of made his hay as a hitting coach, and being aggressive. And it seems like last year and in years prior, the Gamecocks watched a lot of strike threes, and I think that, can't remember who said it recently. It was Coach Lake. He said, you see the batting averages soar when you take 3 swings at the plate. Do you think that that's going to be something that the Gamecock baseball team will be more aggressive with? From being in the batter's box, or what's the mindset that you figured out about these guys and how they want to hit?
Yeah, I don't think a whole lot has changed in terms of like their conversations, right? Like Monty has always been a guy who wants to be very disciplined at the plate in terms of not expanding the strike zone and not swinging it at pitches out of the zone, regardless of what the count is. Like some folks will tell you, like if you got 2 strikes, you got to expand and swing off the plate, and that's not something that he really believes in. And you can debate that one way or the other, but he believes if you start having bad habits in a 2-strike count, then it's gonna permeate over the rest of your at bats. So I do think that South Carolina is going to be a little bit more aggressive in terms of swinging early in counts. That's not something that's been de-emphasized by Monty in the past. Like he's never said, take until you get a strike or anything like that. But at Paul Maneri's opening press conference, he said, we're not here to just walk the entire time. I've got no desire to lead the SEC in walks. And, I think it may be emphasized a little bit more that, to be aggressive early in the count. And I think that's certainly something that we may see a little bit more this year. But in terms of just like overall philosophy, I don't think it's going to change a whole heck of a lot from what Monty's done in the past.
Yeah, I think so many Gamecock fans would like to go back to that Ray Tanner style of hitting where it was like, all right, we're going to win with 3-run dingers and 5 homers in a game. And, we're going to go put runs across the plate. I don't know if that's a way you can still win. I mean, there's 10 different ways you can win in any sport. But, do you think this team's approach is going to be more get guys on base, drive in runs, try and put up more crooked numbers than just big number innings? I mean, that's kind of a loaded question. You want to take any run you can get, but
yeah, I mean, Monty's always been kind of a middle field approach kind of guy, line drive, middle of the field, and sometimes those turn into home runs, and sometimes they turn into doubles. I think a lot of it is just kind of each hitter recognizing who they are and understanding what they're good at. But if you hit line drives back up the middle of the field, usually good things happen. So, that's always kind of the point of emphasis for Monty in terms of like, what are we trying to do with a baseball here? So, I think that when you look up and down the lineup, I think that's probably what you're going to see a lot of in terms of approach. Like that's kind of the way they've built this roster, this lineup.
So, Whittle, I know you always go ahead, Alex.
Yeah, I was going to say, from what you've seen in preseason, who have been some guys other than Ethan Petrie, who obviously I think when I saw in your stats at over 400, who are some guys who maybe caught you by surprise with either how well they performed or maybe taking a next step from where they were last year?
Yeah, I mean, Talmadge LaCroix is one from an offensive standpoint, position player standpoint, who really jumps off the page with what he's been able to do. When you look back at last year's stats, I should have them in front of me. I don't have them in front of me right this second. Yeah, I'm gonna pull them up. I'll filibuster here for a second. But when you look at him last year, I mean, he ended up hitting 242 with 3 home runs, 332 slugging percentage. That's not good. That's really not any good at all from a junior who's hoping and wanting to get drafted. So it was a really disappointing season for him last year. But you look at what he's done in the fall and then coming into this season, these last 3 weeks, been 11 scrimmages. He's hitting 461, 2 home runs, 2 doubles. Like, I mean, he's really turned it up from an offensive standpoint. And, that's been really encouraging. He's done okay defensively at catcher. I mean, there's still going to be a pretty noticeable drop off, I think, from Cole Messina to anybody who's back there, and that's obviously understandable. But he's somebody who kind of jumps out as somebody who's really improved their game from last year, and Kennedy Jones too. Like, there's a lot of fond memories of Kennedy Jones from last year, and there should be. He had a bunch of big moments, and I think part of the reason is he was one of very few guys who hit better with runners on base than he did overall. But you look back at his numbers, he hit 289 with 9 home runs, and those are fine numbers, but those aren't like eye popping or anything like that. And folks have talked about he's gonna hit for a lot, or he's somebody who you circle to hit for power. And yes, based on what he's done here since he's come back from the summer, but 9 home runs isn't a ton. I mean, Will Tippett had 7 last year, and he had it in far fewer at bats. Tippett had 7 home runs and 133 at bats, and Jones had 9 home runs and 201 at bats. So, it's not like he's hitting a ton of home runs. Tippett just struck out a ton, but but he's hit for more power. Since he's been back, he's got a couple of home runs in these scrimmages. He's got a couple of doubles. He's driving in runs still. His strikeouts are down a little bit. So, I think he's improved markedly. He hit 400 in these 11 scrimmages too. So those are 2 guys who I think have really stepped up their game. And, they've been longtime starters, Talmadge here and, Kennedy both here and at UNC Greensboro. So, they're going to be counted on to play at a much higher level this year than they did last year.
So, John, you do a really cool thing on the website, and you probably, I don't know if you have an article set up for this, but it's, some things some things you think, and I think there's one other thing. I'm not going to ask you to give me 3 of each, but, what's something that what's something you think, and what's something that has you worried potentially about this team coming up this year?
Yeah, it's well. I'm going to start off with what worries me. I'll go backwards.
Okay.
The thing that's most concerning to me, I'll give you two that are most concerning to me, and I'll start with pitching since I usually go the other way. But I'm worried about what the back end of the game is going to look like. Brendan Sweeney is who's been there here lately, and that's who it feels like they're kind of grooming to be that guy. And Zachary Russell, a freshman, is another guy that they've been looking at back there. But Sweeney's given up some hits, and those are better than walks. You don't ever want your closer to walk a guy. You at least want to challenge the hitter and make him hit you. But he's given up some hits, both in the fall and the preseason. And yeah, and Monday they had kind of a short scrimmage, a bunch of relief situational kind of things, and Sweeney gives up back-to-back home runs on his first two hitters. And Russell's been okay, but he's a freshman, and he's got some command things that he's working through, and he's walked a few guys, and so I worry a little bit about what the back end of the game is going to look like. Tyler Pitzer is one who I think could have a role back there, but that would probably be my chief concern at this point. But Sweeney might end up being a dude. I mean, he's 6'7", he gets the ball up to 97 miles an hour. Like, he might be able to make just a couple of adjustments and be that shutdown guy. But, until somebody goes out there and does it as a closer, and this goes for anybody any year, like, we didn't really know what Garrett Gainey was going to be like last year. He ended up being pretty dang good in that closer role. We didn't really know what he was going to do. Maybe we'll see a different Brendan Sweeney when the lights come on. His game may tick up a little bit. So, and it's worked it's been the opposite for guys in the past as well. So, got to see how he reacts. But that's kind of my biggest worry on that side. And then I'll worry about catcher until there's not reason to. Like, it's just, to me, that position is the most important in college baseball. Like, it's just you have so much to do with how the outcome of the game comes about. Like, you've got to handle the pitchers well. They have to trust you. And you can't just be a defensive guy anymore. You got to have a little bit of offense too. And you look at Talmadge and what he's done in the past, and you know that he hasn't caught much over the last couple of years, caught it all over the last couple of years. And you just worry about that, because that guy, whoever's behind the plate, just has so much influence over how a game plays out. And that's going to be a little bit of a concern and worry until it isn't for me. But I've seen some encouraging signs from him, and I'm less concerned now than I was at the end of the fall. But until games get going, that's going to be a little bit of a worry. So, but I think South Carolina is going to. And another worry that I had, but something that I think, to go back to your question, is I think South Carolina is going to be okay at the corner infield spots with Ethan Petrie at first base and KJ Scobie at third. I watched the same thing y'all did at the end of last year with Ethan Petrie playing some first base and it just being bad. He's really made 180-degree improvement over there from last spring until this year. I'm much more comfortable watching him. After these last couple of weeks, he's made some nice stretches. He's made some nice picks. He's obviously a big body over there. He looks a lot more natural than he ever did. And KJ Scobie is somebody Paul Maneri's praised a good bit for his defense. Coming into the preseason, did that at his preseason press conference a few weeks back, and I agree to some extent. I think he can be a good defender over there, but he led the team in errors in the fall. There were some challenging moments over there for him, and for Paul to talk about him the way he did defensively, I didn't quite see it, but he's been awesome. These last few weeks, and really proven Coach Maneri right. So I think South Carolina is going to be be solid at those corner infield spots after not being real sure on that. What I know is South Carolina's got two guys at the top who are of the pitching staff, and Dylan Eskew and Matthew Becker, who have had ups and downs over their South Carolina career, but those guys have put in some work this offseason to make this last season in college baseball their best. Those guys have worked tremendously hard, and they've had pretty tremendous results. Coming into this season, Matthew Becker, as I mentioned earlier, he's been great, but Dylan Eskew has been really, really good too. He's given up 3 earned runs, in 11 innings this preseason, but he struck out 14 guys. So, both of those guys have added pitches. Folks will say, well, we've seen what they can do in the past. Like, what's going to make them better? Well, both of those guys have added a pitch. Like Matthew Becker's changeup now is might be better than his curveball. And that's a big deal to add that kind of strikeout pitch. I mean, it's a swing and miss pitch, and Dylan Eskew got a lot of love for his sinker and ability to get ground balls, and that's something that'll go one way, and now he's got a cutter that'll go the other way. So he's got fastballs going in 2 different directions, and I just think both of those guys are ready. Now, both of those guys Friday night starters, I don't know, probably not. I mean, like I said earlier, they're not your first, second, third round draft picks like most of these SEC teams are going to throw at you on a Friday night, but both of those guys have positioned themselves to be really good and really effective this year.
Could Becker be a guy who, let's say, for instance, that Eskew and McCoy kind of solidify themselves in the rotation, and then Jerzenbeck gets back to who he could potentially be? I know Maneri kind of mentioned Becker as a guy who could be a wild card, maybe that late inning closer guy if they need it. Could you see him sliding into that late role, and maybe would that alleviate some of the worry of that back end of the bullpen?
Well, Maneri's mentioned it so much that, I can't discount it, but I think that's a terrible idea if we're being completely honest. I think Matthew is somebody who just knowing his personality a little bit over the last, even back to his Chapin days, like he's going to be a guy who's more successful when he knows what his job is. And, that's not to say that that he can't go out there and be kind of in limbo and still go out there and be successful whenever he's called upon. But, he deserves to be a weekend starter. If we're being honest, like I think Matthew should be the opening game starter. I think he's earned that right, but because of the way he's performed. But it's Dylan Eskew's fine too. But I can't envision. I don't think that would be the best situation for South Carolina if they put him in that kind of role. But I guess we'll see what happens as things kind of play out. And, Eli Jerzenbeck's got a long way to go to get into that conversation too.
Well, we got a ton. I shouldn't say a ton. We got a number of questions for John still to come. But Alex, let's go ahead and hit a sponsor break and make sure we get that in, and then we'll come back for more conversation with John Whittle, thebigspur.com.
Mike here for one of the better dining options in the capital city. When I first moved there, I asked people around the radio station, where are the best wings? Well, the consensus was D's Wings. That was then. Today, they still have the best wings, but it's so much more. Now in their new location at 415 Meeting Street in West Columbia, yeah, they get voted the best wings on a routine basis. Yes, they get voted the best sports bar on a routine basis, but they're not just about wings, and really, they're not just a sports bar. It is a family-run local restaurant and bar with 20 TVs and 25 beers on tap. And how about these daily specials? Every Monday night at D's, you've got 75-cent wings from 4 until closing. Tacos on Tuesday. Then on Wednesday, 18 wings and a pitcher of beer for $29. You've also got ribs and oyster bucket specials on Thursday. And no matter how big the party is, 20 or more, no problem. Just call ahead of time and they'll take terrific care of you. They'll do takeout as well. And guess what? A human will answer the phone and take the order. Billy and his staff do an outstanding job. Check out D's 415 Meeting Street in West Columbia.
Yeah, always check out D's. I know all three.
I did last night.
Oh, what'd you get, John?
9-piece medium with raw fries.
Nice.
That sounds awesome. Well, make sure if you're in the Columbia area, go to Dee's. You might run into Alex Jones or John Whittle there. Um, ask for an autograph, ask for a selfie. I'm sure they'd be more than happy to do so. And next time I'm in town, hopefully we can all get together. I do want to give a shout out to some other shows. Earlier tonight we had Joe Machika and the walkthrough, and he's doing a fantastic job covering the women's program. And then don't forget, you got 2 shows every single weekday, basically from 10 until 2 p.m. John, were you on the show today? I know Alex was. Or were you on yesterday, the morning show?
Yesterday.
Okay, so you can always find more of us on those weekday shows. I know all 3 of us are regular guests on those shows. And then don't forget Chin Music and Chad Holbrook. We love some Chad Holbrook around here, even though some Gamecock fans might not. He is a fantastic guy and a fantastic coach. And we wish his Cougs all the success in the world this year, unless they're playing the Gamecocks. But John, we've talked a lot about different players, and you've mentioned some names, and we kind of mixed it between pitchers and catchers and fielders and where they're going to be in the batting lineup. But just to kind of like summarize this as best we can. So position battles, one of the things I love about Coach Maneri is how candid he is. I mean, either he's the best liar and has the best poker face in the world, or he just tells you how it is and the truth and what he's thinking that day. But I know that some of these position battles have been locked up, according to Coach Maneri. But can you fill us in on what might be happening around those and maybe go through the diamond?
Sure. I mean, I think coming into the preseason, like you have Nathan Hall locked in center field, Henry Kasmer locked in at shortstop, Talmadge LaCroix locked in at catcher. And, the rest was kind of up for debate. Like Ethan Petrie was going to be in there somewhere, and Kennedy Jones was going to be in there somewhere. Ethan Petrie could play first base, third base, right field. Kennedy Jones could play left field or DH, and it would be, who wins the jobs to make all the pieces fit right. Like is Bo Holland's going to be so magical at first base that you have to put Ethan Petrie in right field, or is Dalton Mayshore going to be such a great player that you have to put Petrie at first base and let Mayshore play right? Those were kind of the things. The second base was wide open. Paul did mention that KJ Scobie was going to be his guy at third base, but he had a foot injury right before the start of preseason practice, and there was some real concern that might be broken, and that might cost him 6 or 8 weeks of the season. It ended up being just kind of a day-to-day type thing. So with that, KJ Scobie was pretty locked in at third base. I guess as locked in at third base as a freshman can be. But then it's how does it shake out? And Dalton Mayshore has really turned up his game since the fall. He had a rough fall and just wasn't great. He ended it a little bit better than where it started, but he kind of went out there and won that right field job. And as I mentioned earlier, Ethan Petrie's played so much better at first base. Like you feel good about putting him over there, and Maneri already thinks that's his best pro position. So, it makes sense. And then, Blake Jackson in left field, he was a candidate out there. He had some hamstring problems in the fall and didn't play great. And does he earn a starting job? And I think he has, and I think he'll end up starting in left field, putting Kennedy Jones at the DH spot. So, Kennedy, I don't know exactly what's going on with him. He didn't throw a lot from the outfield during these scrimmages. He started tossing the ball in some towards the end. But so I think he'll probably end up DHing at least at the start. But Kennedy's become a much better player from a defensive standpoint too. He's just worked a little bit harder, I think, and is in much better shape this year maybe than last year. So he's able to do a little bit more defensively. And, he's not that far off from Jackson in terms of defensive ability. So, if you decide you want to do something different at DH, you can always put Kennedy Jones in left field and not have too big of a drop off there. So, that's most of them. But then you look at second base, and that's been kind of wide open because, it's felt like Maneri has wanted to play Nolan Naraki there. And, coming out of the fall, like Naraki had some knee problems. and he had him coming in to the preseason too. And that was, is he going to be healthy? He's been kind of banged up for most of the time he's been at South Carolina. And, is he going to be healthy? You had Will Tippett, who played phenomenal in the fall. You had Caden Gaskin, who was brings a little something different than most of the guys on the team, and in terms of his speed and ability to steal bases. And Jordan Carrion has played really well. He had a rough fall, but he's had a great preseason. So that second base spot felt kind of up for grabs coming into this. But when Naraki got healthy, he's played great. He's played great there offensively and defensively. He's hit for some power. He's got a couple home runs, a double, a triple, driven in some runs. And, he's kind of gone out and won that job. So, I think that's where things stand going into this. And with Talmadge at catcher, Petrie at first, Naraki at second, Kazmer short, Scobie at third, probably Blake Jackson in left, Nathan Hall in center, and Mayshore in right with Kennedy Jones DH. And so, I think it's all pretty cut and dry in terms of starters. And then you look at, who's gonna be Talmadge. LaCroix's back up at catcher because Talmadge isn't Cole Messina, and he's not going to catch every game. So is it going to be a Max Coffer or Ryan Bakes? Both of those guys have very similar offensive numbers. Coffer was thought to be more of a defensive guy when they recruited him. He's struggled, if we're being honest, in my estimation, back there based on what he was anticipated to be. He hasn't been terrible. He just hasn't been like the plus defensive guy who they kind of thought he was. And Ryan Bakes has really improved. They've been pretty similar from a defensive standpoint, but Maneri mentioned that he feels like Bakes has been a little bit better defensively. So we'll see how that kind of shakes out. But that I wouldn't call that a starting position, but that guy's going to start some games over the course of the season, regardless of injury or anything like that. So that's kind of the last thing that's really up in the air going into the season. We'll see how things evolve.
Yeah, it's for me, as far as I go back, John, there's always been somebody that comes off the bench or somebody that, doesn't have a clear role at the start of the season, but then, finds their way into a big moment. And, for me, I'm a big Will Tippett fan. And I'll be honest, I'm a big Will Tippett fan because you're such a big Will Tippett fan. And I trust your eye. And you've said that there's more to Will Tippett than what Gamecock fans have seen. So that's the guy I'm rooting for. Anybody else like that or Tippett, come to mind as kind of a not a breakout superstar, but somebody that comes in and helps you win some games.
No, just to speak on Tippett for a minute, we'll see how things go for him this season. Like Maneri has been very forthright in saying, I'm going to get this guy opportunities. So regardless of what I think about him, regardless of what anybody else thinks about him, Mark Kingston or, Mark Jackson, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter what anybody else thinks. Paul Maneri thinks that Will Tippett needs to play some. He's talked about playing him some at first base. He's talked about playing him some at second base. Paul Maneri wants to play him, so he's going to play. But he's got to be better. He's really struggled this spring, and he's had 2 great falls in a row. And last year it obviously didn't carry over into the season. His great fall this year, where he led the team in batting average and was second in on base percentage and second in OPS, it hasn't carried over. I mean, he's hitting, 195 and is striking out about half his at bats. And I mean, that's just not something that you can play. So he's got to figure out a way to carry that over into the season. And, that's just kind of a harsh reality at this point. So, I think he's good enough defensively. And that's another thing too. He's really struggled defensively in these scrimmages. He's looked better at first base than he has at second, which is really surprising considering he played that at such a high level, his freshman year from a defensive standpoint. So, I think he's got, a chance and he's going to have some opportunities, but he's got to perform much better. When you ask that question, my mind kind of went to 2 places, and one's an old guy and one's a young guy. We'll start with the young guy. Bo Hollins is somebody who can go in and play first base really, really well. And, when games are tight late, they may put Bo out there and move Ethan, whether it be it to, well, they would move Ethan to right field, and whether they take out Blake Jackson and move Dalton Mayshore over there in the left, or take Mayshore out of the game. I mean, that's kind of to be determined. But Bo Hollins is somebody to really kind of keep an eye on, and he's got tremendous offensive ability. He's still kind of working on making that adjustment from an offensive standpoint to the college game. So, it may come a time later in this year where he's starting at first base and, Petrie playing right. But it may be next season. But he's somebody to certainly keep an eye on. And, Evan Stone is the other guy who comes to mind. And, I know folks kind of put him in the same box as Will Tippett as far as, not producing enough offensively. And, he hasn't produced enough offensively this spring either. He's got a couple of home runs, but his strikeouts are down a little bit from where they have been in the past, but that number is still a little bit too high. So he's got to balance that out a little bit. But, he robbed a home run the other day. Max Hoffer's numbers would look a little bit better with another home run and another hit to his credit. But he took away a home run the other day. And I know that Paul Maneri really likes him too, and is planning on getting him some opportunities as well. Evan didn't get any chances last year. He had opportunities as a freshman and had opportunities as a sophomore. He didn't get opportunities last year. So folks who say he stunk last year just aren't right. So I think he's going to get some chances this year at times, and we'll see what ends up happening. But he'd be one who I think could have some influence this year. Maybe not not as a pinch hitter off the bench or something like that, but it may be in a starting role. Maybe at times it may be late game defensively at times. But he's going to have an influence on the year.
We've kind of talked about the bats and the pitching so far. From what you've seen in preseason, how would you assess how the team's performing defensively right now?
I'll be honest, like that was a big concern of mine coming out of the fall because, like I mentioned, KJ Scobie was it was tough in the fall at times, and at first base it wasn't great at times. Jace Warder was a guy they were looking at, a junior college kid that they recruited, and just wasn't really getting the job done over there. And there are concerns from a defensive standpoint. I felt a lot better these last couple of weeks about what this team has looked like defensively, and I touched on that and the things that I think earlier when I talked about the corner infield. But Kazmir at shortstop, he doesn't look smooth there. I mean, if we're just being honest about it, but he makes the plays for the most part, and he's not going to be a dynamic guy who's getting the balls that just kind of wow you, but he makes a lot of plays. So second base will be interesting. I mean, Naraki doesn't have tremendous range. Maybe it'll look better, as he continues to get healthy with that knee injury that he's had that slowed him a little bit. So maybe I don't have the right perspective on him just yet because of that. So it's not the most athletic player at that position, at least what it looks like right now. But he makes the plays that have gone his way. So outfield should be fine from a defensive standpoint. Nathan Hall can really go get it. Not quite as well as Evan Stone, but I mean not crazy far off. You're not having a tremendous drop off from a defensive standpoint if you have Nathan Hall out there in place of Evan Stone. And like I mentioned, Kennedy Jones has been a lot better. Blake Jackson's fine. Dalton Mayshore is pretty good. I feel a lot better defensively now than I did. And going back to the catcher spot, like they're not going to throw out a bunch of runners. And I think something that we need to kind of keep in perspective is most folks don't throw out a lot of runners. If you're throwing out more than about 30% in the MLB, you're pretty darn good. And so that's a low percentage of times that you catch guys stealing. South Carolina's given up 8 stolen bases a game. You may want to look at the pitchers and say, hey, quit letting so many guys on base. So,
or hold them. Do something to hold them at first, or hold them.
Yeah, and Yeah, I mean, South Carolina's just not going to throw out a bunch of guys this year behind the plate, but also don't. I think there's ways to manage that. And you mentioned it, pitchers holding guys and pitching out occasionally. That's something that they've done a lot in scrimmages. Is they've had some pitch outs, and that may be something you see a little bit more of if a pitcher's ahead in the count. They trust the pitcher to be able to get back into the zone. So it'll be interesting to see how all that comes about. But the point I was trying to get around to is like they haven't led a whole bunch of balls to the backstop. Like if you have a catcher that keeps having to turn his back to the infield and go pick up the baseball, like that's when you have some serious problems. And that hadn't happened too much. They've kept balls in front of them pretty well, kept guys from getting extra bases on balls in the dirt. So I feel better, much better about the defense than I did, last a few weeks ago coming into this season.
Hey, John, really quick too. And we've only got a couple more questions, and we'll let you run. You told me this a while ago. What was Ray Tanner's mantra for how to make sure you hosted a regional? There was something about. Go ahead. What was it again?
Yeah, win your series at home and don't get swept on the road.
Was there anything about midweeks?
Yeah, it was. I think they expected. I think it was you could lose maybe 5 non-conference games, and anything more than that was too many. And there were you never want to lose more than a couple of those midweek games, and South Carolina's done largely a good job of that over the years. There's certainly been some times, and I can't remember which year it was. I think it was 18 or 19, where they have Jalen Vasquez out there pitching, the shortstop, and you were basically sacrificing midweek games to try to win on the weekends, and you had some times like that or some outliers like that, but you don't ever want to lose more than a couple of midweek games a year, and you also understand that everybody's gonna lose a couple of midweek games each year.
Yeah, and I guess my main question with that, and where I was kind of trying to lead to, I guess, is, we've talked about the depth of the pitching staff. I think that's one thing that Coach Maneri said a handful of times. I think you even said there's depth. Maybe there's not the top end, but there is depth. Do you think that the depth of this pitching staff will lend itself to success in the midweeks and being, playing some non-conference teams that really aren't up to your caliber in the SEC?
Yeah, I think it certainly can. I look at, South Carolina's staff full of pitchers, and, I think I should probably mention that the way you build a roster now is different than what you did in the past. Like, you brought in or you could have 35 guys on the roster, but oftentimes you'd start with 40 or 45 and redshirt some guys and develop some guys, and you'd have some guys on the team who you didn't maybe think would have a big role, and just kind of develop and pitch them in blowouts for an inning, get a couple of outs here and there. You don't have that anymore. Like I look at South Carolina's roster this year, and because you don't construct your roster that way. I mean, South Carolina cut a whole bunch of freshmen who are really good in the fall, but they've got older guys on the roster who have college experience, and I look up and down at the pitchers on South Carolina's roster this year, and there's maybe 1 or 2 guys who you could throw out there who maybe you don't feel real comfortable with. There might be 1 or 2 guys on the roster who may not be quite up for it this year. But if you were to, and I'm just picking some names, like if you were to tell me Wyatt Evans was incredible this year, I could see it. If you were to tell me Wyatt Evans is terrible and has no role, or I won't say terrible, but has no role on this year's pitching staff, like I could see that too. I mean, you could say that for several of these guys, but because there's you can't pitch everybody. Like you can probably pitch a dozen guys, and a dozen guys could probably have some type of role over the course of the year, but there's 15, 16 guys on the pitching staff. Like not everybody's going to have a role. So, I do think depth is certainly there for South Carolina this year. Who exactly is going to be in there, I don't really know just yet. So much of it's going to be like who performs when the lights come on. So many of these pitchers are new. There's certainly some who aren't, but there's so many of these pitchers are new, and you don't know how they're going to react to major college baseball, whether it's a Brendan Sweeney or Jackson Susie or Brandon Stone, who have all pitched in junior college, or whether it's your freshmen like Zach Russell and Cooper Parks and Ryder Garino, who all three were pretty darn good, have been pretty darn good. Like, you just don't know how they're going to react. And, so I do think depth is certainly a positive for this year's team. Like, there are very few guys who I look at and say, like, this guy's got no chance. And, when you have a pitching staff like that, like, I think you've got an opportunity to be pretty good.
So I'm going to put you on the spot here, John, and I'm going to tell you the whole question first so you can think about it, be as candid with your answer as you want. What is South Carolina's baseball team ceiling this year? What's its floor? And what do you think the end result's going to be?
Yeah, and I think probably the best way is to start out with the floor. Like, Mark Etheridge from D1 Baseball has South Carolina 15th out of 16 teams in the SEC, and Missouri is just but it's going to be a challenge for Missouri to win double-digit games in the SEC. Like, they're just off the pace right now, and that's just the way it is. So South Carolina's basically picked to finish last in the SEC when it comes to teams who have an opportunity to compete this year. Like, Missouri has no opportunity to compete. It's like Vanderbilt football most years, right? Like Diego Pavia-less Vanderbilt football. Like, that's what Missouri is. And, like, that's where Mark Etheridge has them. The coaches have voted South Carolina 14th out of 16. So, like, what's the floor? The floor is obviously missing the tournament. And, that's really difficult for me to imagine. And I don't think that that's what's going to happen. But there's a lot of really smart people who think that that's a real possibility. And, the SEC, as good as it is, isn't getting 15 teams into the tournament. It's probably not getting 14 teams into the tournament. It's probably not getting 13 teams in the tournament. Might get 13 teams, but not 14 or 15 or 16 for sure. So that's what the floor is. There's not the frontline pitchers. There's not, like, everybody has one Ethan Petrie. Basically, everybody has one Ethan Petrie. A lot of schools have 2 or 3. Some have 4 or 5 or 6. Texas A&M might have 7. Tennessee might have 8. So, there's when you look at why South Carolina was picked where they were picked, I think a lot of coaches look at it and say, like, what did you lose and what did you bring in? And South Carolina obviously lost a lot. And what did South Carolina bring in? The 15th best recruiting class in the SEC. Now, part of that is because of numbers. They took very few high school guys. But you look at what they did in the portal. And, Henry Kasmer was a guy that a lot of folks wanted and was really high caliber, and Dalton Nashor was probably a step below it. But Nathan Hall didn't start at Clemson. I mean, it wasn't because he was hurt. It's because at Clemson figured that they had 3 better outfielders than Nathan Hall. And so is coach is going to view Nathan Hall as a transformative piece for South Carolina when he couldn't see the field at Clemson? It's not like he was a quarterback sitting behind a Heisman Trophy winner. There's 3 outfield spots. Nathan Hall's been transformative for South Carolina so far this preseason, and looks to be that way going into the season. But coaches don't know that. They're going to look at that and say, yeah, that's not really a big piece. They're not going to look at Max Coffer, who was a backup catcher at Texas A&M, and say, oh, that's a big piece. They're not going to look at Jarvis Evans, who got knocked out of the game in the first inning against South Carolina at Founders Park last year because he gave up so many runs and hits, as a transformative piece. Same with Austin Crowther. Same with Wyatt Evans, who didn't even make the roster at Tennessee last year. Nolan Naraki was a part-time starter at Clemson. Like, what does South Carolina bring in that says, okay, they should be higher than 14th, 15th in the SEC. So I can see why South Carolina was picked down there. And that's why I think that's kind of the floor for the team in terms of what folks are saying about them. But I don't think that that's where they end up. And Paul Maneri certainly has a track record of knowing what good baseball looks like, and he laughs at the notion that this team could be down there. And I sort of agree with him. And I can't say I know the SEC inside and out well enough to say, that South Carolina is better than this team, and just give the list. But South Carolina is going to be better than a lot of these teams that are in there. What's the ceiling? I hate putting ceilings on teams now. I would say that, especially if some of these guys who you think can play really good and be big pieces, if you get everything out of them, I can't rule out going to the College World Series. I don't think that happens. What do I think the end result will be? I think this is a regional team. I don't think this probably hosts, but I think it's a regional team. And you get into the tournament, and so much depends on how well you're playing at that point in time. You mentioned at the top, like, how do we get to where things are right now? And you look back at last year's team, and everyone thinks about how awful they were, how terrible everything was, and how Mark Kingston needed to be fired. And I agree, a change needed to be made. But with 2 weeks left in the season, South Carolina was projected to host a regional.
Yeah.
They played bad baseball at the wrong time. They had guys playing in spots and giving away runs, and pitchers weren't pitching well because they couldn't get a ball fielded on the infield. Like, things fell apart at the end, and South Carolina shouldn't have hosted, and South Carolina was playing terrible at the end. But it wasn't way far off for the entire season. They were playing terrible baseball. So if you can flip the script from last year and, instead of playing, below where you were and play kind of above your heads a little bit at the right time, then, maybe you can make a run in the tournament this year instead of going from, a potential host to a team that can't beat James Madison. So I think South Carolina makes it into the tournament. How far they go is just kind of dependent on how they're playing at the time. It sure would be helpful if you can get Eli Jersenbeck pitching the way that we think he can. He's a guy who could be a top 50 pick, in the draft this June. Like, he's got that kind of ability. But if they had a 30-round draft, right now, the way he's pitching right now, like, he's not. I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't know. It would take a lot to convince me the way he's kind of handled things to take him particularly high. But he's a top 50 talent when he's got things going right. So you get him going in the right direction, you get kind of like the ceiling of Nathan Hall, you get the ceiling of KJ Scobie. Like, some of these guys don't have real high ceilings, but they can be good college players. Like, Adrian Morales' ceiling was only so high, but who trades him? Like, Kennedy Jones's ceiling is only so high, but who's going to trade him if he's playing the way he's capable of playing? So, I think South Carolina is a regional team and probably and not a host, but I do think they can get into the tournament and see where things go from there.
Well, John, I think you've said it all, man. We appreciate your time. For my money, there's nobody better that covers the entire university better than you do from an athletics perspective. You have the pulse on so many different programs, but baseball, I know it's kind of where you cut your teeth in this sports media world, but I don't think there's a single person alive that knows more about Gamecock baseball and the ins and outs on a daily basis than you. So to have you on this show today, tonight, I should say, we appreciate it so much, John.
I appreciate it, and thanks for saying that. I'll send you the check the same place I sent that lengthy list of positive things to say. So I really appreciate you saying that, though. So, but yeah, I always always enjoy being on with you guys. You guys continue to crush it, and I appreciate being on.
Absolutely, John. We'll try and get you on during the season when your time
Sounds
allows.
great. Just let me know.
All right. See you, John. Well, Alex, I think that John said it all. Wow, just a wealth of information. And one day during the off season, during the summer show, I'd love for him just to come on and talk about all the Gamecock greats he's covered, and the teams that could have done it, the teams that shouldn't have done it, all that kind of stuff. But John is the best. Alex, any parting shots from you?
Yeah, I mean, I think we really touched it all, from position battles to what the pitching staff's going to look like, from top to bottom to the batting order. I mean, it's pretty crazy that baseball season's already here and 3 days away now, but it's here and it's coming.
Yeah, there'll be a lot of shows on during the midweek when we're on here, and I'll have the game on to my left, and you might even be at the ballpark some of those nights, and I'll be doing it solo. But we're all excited for baseball season. Basketball season has been tough to cover this year, from me and Alex's perspective, because we know for the fans that they want the success so badly, and it's not fun to talk about an 0-10 SEC team, and it's probably not fun for y'all to listen to. But we appreciate y'all spending all this time that you do with us. When you spend your time with us, you give us the most valuable thing you have, and we can't thank you enough. Next week, the show will be on Wednesday night at 8 o'clock. So we'll be talking about 3 different basketball games on that show, and we'll be talking about opening weekend and baseball and non-conference slates. Be on us in a hurry, and softball's here. The women's basketball program is still in the thick of things for a national championship. So appreciate it. And we didn't even talk about any football recruiting. This might be the first time we have not talked about the football team on a show, but that'll be coming as well. So we have jam-packed episodes for you coming in the near future. So Alex, that being said, I'm going to sign us off. Hope you have a good evening, and we'll talk soon. See you, everybody.